So, the Gideon Boako, if you read today's publisher newspaper, now he's warning that he says the Member of Parliament for Tano North has cautioned the Mahama administration against introducing disguised taxes after pledging to abolish electronic levy and betting taxes. Dr. Gideon Boako is also the former economic advisor and spokesperson for the NPP flag bearer, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, expressing his concerns about the potential fiscal consequences of scrapping these taxes without a clear plan to address the resulting revenue gap. Where Dr. Boako is raising these concerns in an interview with the media on Monday, January 13, following the vetting of Finance Minister Dr. Kwesi Pratt. Dr. Pratt had announced that the Mahama administration plans to eliminate the E-Levy and betting taxes in its first budget. However, Dr. Boako criticized the strategy, arguing that it risks creating significant revenue shortfalls, which could undermine Ghana's financial commitments, particularly to the International Monetary Fund. I think that he performed reasonably well, but unfortunately his response fell short. For instance, when asked how he plans to offset the revenue loss from scrapping these taxes, he proposed cutting expenditure. But cutting expenditure does not solve the problem because the IMF evaluates debt service relative to revenue, not expenditure. He elaborates that while expenditure cuts might provide temporary relief, they fail to address the core issue of generating sufficient revenue to meet debt servicing obligations. He's warning that the IMF is likely to demand alternative revenue sources, which could lead to the introduction of new taxes. He says we cannot afford to give with one hand and take with another, urging policymakers to adopt a transparent and sustainable approach to managing the nation's resources, fundraising, finances. So, whereas, for instance, how Kwesi Pratt was saying that, look, yes. I get the irony because he's also promising to do the same. Your microphone, sir, your microphone. Yes, you said I'm not surprised.
Are you not surprised that the person raising this issue is Dr. Gideon Boako?
Yes.
Given the fact that the campaign that he featured in prominently, also made the same promise.
Yes, absolutely.
So are you not surprised that he's the one raising this issue?
Yeah, but his issue is this. His issue is this: that no problem, go ahead and scrap it because it's a campaign promise. But in scrapping these levies and taxes, we do not want to hear you introduce another one because that is not the promise.
How can you even say that? It's a huge problem. That because government said that it was going to remove e-levies, government loses its right to introduce other taxes which may not affect the vulnerable in our society.
Right.
Or other taxes which will seek to minimize the profits of multinational corporations. Or other taxes which will control the degradation of the environment and so on. How can you make such a statement?
Right.
I mean, really, sometimes I have to watch my mouth so
I think it's just
use some kind of words.
Right. I think it's just the usual politics.
How can you say that?
It's just the usual politics.
That because government says that I'm going to remove E-Levy, government cannot impose any other taxes. How can you even say that? Unbelievable. Government has a responsibility to maximize our earnings from the exploitation of our resources, especially by multinational corporations. So if it is possible to impose taxes on multinational corporations in order to raise the revenue we get from the exploitation of our resources, what is wrong with that? Would he be opposed to that? I have spoken about rationalization of the tax regime. If it is possible to increase the annual fee for renewal of gun license from 12 cities to 1,000 cities, and it's not going to affect the vulnerable in our society, why shouldn't government do that?
Right.
And so on. You understand? So I think that's the way in which you have to look at the statements he's made. There's one which actually surprises me. The one which says that there's no correlation between expenditure and revenue.
And revenue.
There is. If you control expenditure, you may not need a certain quantum of revenue to function.
True.
So there's a direct correlation between expenditure and revenue.
Right.
And I'm surprised that he doesn't see that, especially given his credentials as an economist. I'm told he's an economist, isn't he?
Yeah? Uncle, you are not told he's an economist.
Yes. Okay. That's even better. Right. That's even better.
No, but his point is that
so I'm surprised that an economist of his caliber
right.
does not see the relation between expenditure and revenue.
I get that. Even though, but I mean, to be more specific about what he says that the IMF. So first of all, it says cutting down expenditure does not solve the problem, because the IMF it doesn't solve the problem, the fiscal problems that we have, according to him.
He's talking about revenue.
He's talking about revenue, but he says the IMF evaluates debt service relative to revenue. So the IMF is essentially looking at how much more money can you raise. I mean, the IMF is looking at how much more money you can raise, and not necessarily how much prudence or how much expenditure cuts you can make in order to save the economy. That's his opinion on this matter.
That our analysis of our situation and so on should always be approved by IMF? Who says that? Who says that the IMF should always...
You are on an IMF program.
So what?
And there are conditionalities.
So what?
If you don't respect those conditionalities, they have consequences.
So what?
I mean, you can ask a more fundamental question, which is, how did we even get there? But once you get there, you must respect what the IMF says.
Who told you that this new government which has just come in has the right to end the arrangement with the IMF? It has the right to do so. There may be consequences. It has the right to weigh the consequences against the gains it will make, by stopping the program.
Yes.
Don't let us think that the IMF is God. The IMF is not God.
I agree.
It's a human institution set up to achieve specific objectives and so on. We don't always have to agree with the IMF.
Well, and so I'm sure you're not surprised at all when the president said he'd be re-engaging the IMF, but that's another conversation for another day. But Haruna,
what did you just say?
No, I'm saying the president said he'd be re-engaging the IMF.
So what?
Yes, in order to look at some of these conditionalities.
So what?
Yes. No, I mean, just to buttress the point you're making.
Because the president says that he'll be re-engaging the IMF, I cannot take a position against IMF.
No, not at all. I'm just actually buttressing the point you're making.
Okay, thank you.
Wow. Anyway, Haruna.
Yes, please.
So here we are. I don't know whether you agree with Gideon Boako and whether you agree with what Kwesi has said.
I think what Gideon Boako is saying is in a specific matter.
Yes.
With regards to, he's saying that cutting down expenditure is not just the solution. It's not just the solution. He went further to explain that when the IMF is doing an analysis, they look at your income, what comes in, vis-a-vis your debt servicing.
Yes.
So debt servicing, in calculation of debt servicing, expenditure does not constitute anything on that. So in the current circumstances, if you are to look at your debt servicing, whether you've cut down expenditure or not, it will not have a reflection on the calculations that is going to be made. It's going to be made on the amount of money that you have generated through your folds. And that is why he's calling that he's not asking them not to introduce tax. And we all know, Uncle, the incidence of taxation always shifted to the final consumer. Whichever level the tax is being introduced, the incidence is always shifted to the final consumer. So as a member of parliament who is in that particular area, is cautioning that much as we want to take away the E-Levy, we must also be very careful in introducing taxes that will also affect the citizens. So not only just telling not to introduce, but just advising that we should not be introducing taxations. I agree with the fact that there are taxes that necessarily doesn't go to the very core poor of our society. But the finality is that the incidence of taxation goes back to final consumers with respect to that. He did not also say that there's no correlation between expenditure cut with respect to the current circumstances that we have. If, for example, you are removing E-Levy, which constitutes, let's say, $12 billion, and you are cutting an expenditure that constitutes about, let's say, $30 billion, I believe that it is going to have a very great impact on revenue, because revenue that would have been used to spend on the expenditure, you would not spend the 30 million on that, and you are not also going to take the 20 million that is coming in. So there is an excess of 10, which invariably, even though not a new receiver, but has impact on the revenue that you would have. So there's always a correlation, but there's always also a reason of a certain caution, depending on indicators that are measured at a particular point in time. And I think that Gideon Boako's call, I think it's a right call, but we must understand and get to know the circumstances in which this particular call is being made.
Yeah, but Haruna,
there's one more point. I mean, the claim that every tax, eventually is passed on to the consumer is not wholly true. For example, the windfall tax, which was introduced under President John Evans Atta Mills.
Yes.
How does that get passed on to the consumer? Windfall tax.
Rainfall or?
Windfall tax.
How does that get passed on to the consumer?
I don't know its application. Maybe if I know how it is applied, I may be able to identify.
The windfall tax came about, at a time when some of our resources appreciated significantly in prices on the world market. So the multinational corporations were making huge profits. Okay, so government decided to change the tax regime in order that we can get a lot more revenue from the activities.
Or you tax them as they repatriate.
So we tax the windfall, the extra profits that they were making. How does that get passed on to the consumer?
Right.
But it depends upon who is the consumer, because it's a taxation.
No, but
so if they are making that, and they also decide that what we do, the business we do and make those particular money, we shift the incidence of that onto the final consumer so that we can increase in an amount. When we are charged, we don't feel it.
The final consumer is in Europe.
But where do they make the money? They make the money from here. They do something before they repatriate, which affects our FDIs. So if they are making the money here, and then what they do to make the money, you tax them higher, they add it back to what they do here before they repatriate.
It doesn't apply.
But you see, Haruna, but you see, but Haruna, I think as Uncle Kwesi said, there's something fundamentally problematic with his call. And if you read the newspaper, I haven't listened to him. So we are going to analyze it based on what the newspapers are reporting.
Yes, please.
I mean, if you say that the NDC has promised to scrap certain taxes and levies, and so that stops them from introducing any new taxes, whether through the front or the back door. In fact, when you read the newspapers, it's through the back door. That's what it said. Same captured in the Statesman newspaper, which is that you want to clandestinely introduce some tax, which I don't even know if it's possible, because we'll be reading the budget and we'll get to know. But let's even assume.
But not just that, you cannot impose taxes without the approval of Parliament.
Absolutely.
And Parliament is an open place.
Right. So
who is going to clandestinely introduce taxes?
Exactly. So when you talk about backdoor, that in itself is problem. And my second issue is that the fact that a party or a government has decided to or has promised to scrap certain taxes, why does that take their right away from introducing taxes for as long as those taxes that are going to be introduced will not affect the vulnerable? But in his case, he makes it explicitly clear. So don't even introduce any taxes at all. And that's where I think that perhaps as somebody who, is a spokesperson for the former vice president and economist himself, who knows that every government would have to raise one form of tax or the other to be able to run the country. Anyway, before I go to our next story.
Gideon Boako's call is on the premise that the MDC in opposition were always against introduction of taxes. So if you are outside, you are against introduction of taxes.
But that in itself is not factually true.
No. They were. Look at the taxes we took away when we came in 2017.
Okay.
We took away almost more than 12 taxes, and we introduced some taxes in the process.
Right.
And they were questioning us all the time that, why are you introducing taxes? Why are you introducing taxes? So stop introduction of taxes. So if Gideon is saying that if you take this away, don't introduce new taxes, it's just to also remind them that this is the governance system. And if you believe that you can't govern without the introduction of taxes, please don't take away, don't bring any tax again.
Yeah, and I'm saying that.
Let's all see.
When I get
but
that.
it was not just that you can't, but he says don't. It is not a restriction,
Right.
but it's a call that they have made before, so that at least we as politicians, when you are in a different seat, you must be very careful the call you make at some point and be able to look at this in the future to know that government will use resources to build our communities, our lives, to be able to build our human capital base and what have you. So we must necessarily not say that government should not introduce taxes. But however, if this was your stand, why not maintain that particular stand, not to introduce any tax? So I don't think that he made a call in malice. He made a call reference to the standard or the state in which this particular government was in opposition and the course of which they have made to substantive government or previous government with respect to the introduction of taxes. There is no government that has come without introduction of taxes, but it depends upon the policies that governments brings in. If you look at the taxes that we have scrapped, look at the air flight taxes, look at the many of the taxes we took, it has a very great impact on the citizens. And the taxes that we introduce, most of them, like Uncle Kwesi said, not all of them also passes through that has much reflection on the citizens. But I always believe that the introduction of even a minute tax would definitely have something to do with the final consumer. And Gideon, I don't think Gideon has made something out of his statement that he has called is not a restriction. It's a call that he's making to them. If they heed to it, so be it. If they are not able to heed to it, then the Ghanaian citizens are watching and listening.
I think it's important that we...
Dr. Gideon
Boako
could have chosen to speak the way you speak, or the way you just spoke. He decided not to. And I think that we should hold on to his own words, not yours. He's saying that if government withdraws these taxes, he shouldn't introduce any other taxes. Yes. Simplicity, that's what he says.
Sorry, Uncle, this is a newspaper report. We have not had the opportunity to listen to the audio or listen
Unfortunately,
to himself.
all we have is the newspaper report.
Yeah, so probably we can go around it, but maybe it is not what directly he said, but the understanding of the writer.
But you're right. But I'm saying that all we have to go by now in this newspaper analysis is what is there.
Yeah.
Okay.
We didn't hear him speak the way you spoke. We heard him say that if you withdraw the E-Levy, you lose your right to introduce any other taxes, or you should not be allowed to introduce any other taxes.
Yeah, moral rights, actually. Yeah. Moral rights.
Which is problematic.